Hi, thanks, Michael. This is Julie speaking. Sorry, I was trying to ping our final panelists into the room. So we're just waiting on a few more people. In the meantime, I will get started. Well, let me just finish this one last little thing and get out of these screens and get back to everybody here. Fabulous. So again, I'm Julie, host for this room and club. Just a few clubhouse pointers to get you started. Use the plus sign at the bottom there to ping others that you think may be interested in this conversation into the room. And you can, if you have a lot of followers, you can narrow the search by using keywords like clinical trials or research. People with that word or words in their bio will pop up. Makes it a little bit easier to find folks. Be sure to follow me, our moderators and panelists here today. Check out others in the room as well. Additionally, to support those using closed captions, you can state your name when you begin speaking and state your name again at the end. And Clubhouse does now support closed captions, which you should be able to view at the bottom of your screen, which I think is a pretty excellent feature. We do encourage audience participation, so if you find yourself inspired, please feel free to raise your digital hand. We'll do our best to get to everyone in the audience. And please note, our club is called Consuli Conversations. So in addition to this room, we host a Data Dignity Dealing You into the Data Economy and a Long COVID Patients Meet Researcher rooms. You can learn more by following our club. Just click the little greenhouse at the top. You'll be able to see all our upcoming rooms as well, and you can save them to your calendar. For any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, please send me a direct message. You can find my email and our social media links in my bio. I love hearing from you guys. So if there's anything you want to share, if you'd like to recommend someone to be on our panel, always great. For those that don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year. We help people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data and make medicine better. We do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent. Our members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical and data trials. There's no cost to join our movement, and you can learn more at consuli.net. That's CONSULI.net. I will pin that to the top of the room in just a moment. It is now our pleasure to turn the floor over to our room co-facilitators, Michael Young and Talia Height, who will be introducing themselves and our expert guests. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Julie, and just so happy to see so many people getting into the room here early. In fact, I see some really prominent folks who I will encourage to come up to the stage if they have comments that they would like to make on our one burning question today. In particular, I see Christine Naro out there, and the inimitable Richard Schwartz is in the audience, dear friend and longtime colleague as well. So first of all, Happy New Year, Clinical Trial Clubhousers. This is 2022, and while there are many elements of this year that sound like the last 2 years, I think all of us are going into this year hopefully with optimism and energy to make things better for patients around the world. And that is really a part of what we're doing here at the Clinical Trial Clubhouse. We are a team of, or a gathering, if you will, of clinical trialists, some pharma industry execs, and importantly, patients interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. We are fortunate, as Julie has pointed out here, to work with Consuli, which is a very innovative team. They are enabling data and AI for good, and in this case, in particular around healthcare and clinical trials. So during this next hour or so, we will be addressing what we call our one burning question. So for those of you who are new to our clubhouse, the one burning question seems to be a great way for us to get monthly focus on a particular area. It generally gets great inputs from a discussion during the last 5 to 10 minutes of our previous room. But then we also canvass nationwide for hot topics, if you will. So if you have any ideas, we encourage you to bring them to us. I'm Michael Young, and I've been working in the clinical trial arena for pretty much so the last decade. Prior to that, have held various commercial roles at several different biotechs and large pharma companies. We're going to get started here. I am very, very pleased that Talia Height is my co-moderator today. And Talia, I'm going to turn this over to you so that you can introduce our one burning question and our esteemed panel here.
Great. Awesome. Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks, Michael. I'm really thrilled to be here again. So thanks, Michael and Julie, for bringing us all together for our monthly Clubhouse discussion on clinical trials. I'm Talia Height, and my background is really all things clinical trials from the site perspective. I started as a research coordinator in this industry about almost 20 years ago, and never wanted to leave after that. And I just love that we're able to bring things together, bring this group of trial enthusiasts together every month to talk about our one burning question. So thanks for inviting me again to co-moderate this discussion. We'll be opening up the discussion here to get into our one burning question here in a minute. But before we do that, let's go ahead and say hello to some of the folks we have on the stage with us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Let's start with Edie Edens. Happy New Year, Edie.
Thanks,
Would you like to
Talia.
intro yourself? Yeah, please.
Yes, this is Edie, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Happy New Year to everyone, wherever you may be celebrating from. So I am a licensed attorney with an emphasis on research compliance and ethics. I'm in my second decade. I started out in the academic medical center world, very much as a typical attorney would, right, at the enterprise-wide level with IRB work and conflicts of interest and research misconduct and auditing, and then took a big leap of faith into the side of things with oncology in a comprehensive cancer center, and never really looked back and began consulting actually in all these different areas back in 2017 with First Class Solutions. Had the pleasure to work with Consuli on this room and a few other things as of late, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think this is just a really critical topic that we overlook in our day-to-day activities and clinical research. So thanks so much. This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Edie. Would love to have Jaleesa please introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaleesa King, and I am a senior data analyst at Greenfire. I largely support our newest investigator grants tool in physics, but in addition to this role, I am a part of Greenfire's All-In Diversity Committee. So within the last year, I participated in various global discussions on the topic of diversity within clinical trials, along with other industry colleagues. And I really look forward to today's discussion. This is something that's really right up my alley and something that we developed a passion for here at Greenfire, and as well as just trying to embark change on the entire industry. So thank you for inviting me, and Happy New Year, everyone. And Jaleesa is done speaking.
Jaleesa, thank you so much. We're really excited to have you in this clubhouse room today. Really appreciate that. Sophie, would you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Talia. Thank you for having me. I apologize in advance if you have any trouble hearing me. I am a little under the weather today, but I could not miss this room. I missed last month's and I sorely regretted it. I am a clinical evaluation scientist at a medical device company called Boston Scientific. And before that, I have 18 years experience in the clinical research space in multiple different roles: CRA, CRC, regulatory data, its contracts, lots of different things in different therapeutic areas, but my favorite is cardiology. And I have a background in medicine before that. So throughout all of my roles, I know very clearly that trust is one of the most important, if not the most important value within clinical trials. And I'm really excited to talk about that today. This is Sophie. I'm complete.
Thank you, Sophie. Lisa, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Sure can, yep.
Great. So I'm Lisa. I am an associate director for study conduct and management with a large pharmaceutical company, private pharmaceutical company. And I'm a nurse by training, and I have worked in the clinical trial space for the last 18 years now. Started as a site coordinator, moved up to management, and then about 5 years ago moved into working for a CRO and then a pharmaceutical company. So have been in the space for a long time and really enjoy these rooms. And I'm looking forward to this topic. I think it's vital to the success of clinical trials. I think trust is key. And we don't talk about it often and we don't think about it much. And I think later when we're doing digressions of lessons learned and how we could have been better, I think this, plays a part. So why not be proactive in regards to building trust? So yeah, grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm complete.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome. And we're really happy to have you here and hear from you today. David, would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. My name is David Ostro. If I go back to the beginning, I got an MD, PhD, and a psychopharmacology research postdoc before doing my psychiatry residency. But during that period, I was a co-founder of the first gay community-based clinic in the United States, now the Howard Brown Clinics of Chicago. And there we discovered that hepatitis B was a sexually transmitted disease. So timing-wise, that coincided with Merck developing the first hepatitis B vaccine. So with the CDC, I organized a multi-site study of the hepatitis B vaccine against sexually transmitted Hep B in gay men, and in 1981, it was approved. It was the first vaccine against any STD. But unfortunately, the trials were done in gay men, and the raw material for manufacture of the antigen also came mostly from gay men with acute hepatitis B infection. So, coincident with the approval of the vaccine was the beginning reports of AIDS, which nobody knew what the cause was, and so the Heptivax first version was pretty much dead in the water, and later on, Merck developed gene editing and produced the antigen in yeast and culture, and that's been I think that's kind of like the beginning of genetic engineering for producing vaccines, which we now see coming to fruition in the mRNA um, field in coronavirus. But also this idea of trust. The conspiracy theory developed once HIV was discovered in 1984, that the virus had been manufactured in a lab either at Merck or the CDC or in collaboration, and then intentionally put into the vials used in the gay vaccine trials in order to spread HIV through gay communities and as a form of genocide. And no matter how much data or evidence we had, including once HIV was discovered, putting it through the Merck factories, procedures, and showed that the virus could not survive the multi-step process that Maurice Hilleman had developed. That still carries on, and it carries on mostly in communities that have a history of mistrust of government officials and research. It's not just we all talk about the Tuskegee experiment, but there's been ongoing history of uh, whether intentional or unintentional research scientists putting science ahead of ethics and the communities that they're caring for. I eventually got into HIV research. Was the PI of the largest and still ongoing multi-center AIDS cohort study, and we know how many conspiracy theories the AIDS epidemic has generated, and now we see it all happening again with the coronavirus pandemic and the vaccine. So I think the issue of trust is very important, but it has to be looked in the larger context of growing public mistrust of science and in particular of pharmaceutical companies and their power in the United States. So that's all I wanted to say now. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We're really looking forward to having you today and hearing your perspective. Fascinating work that you've done over the years. Thank you. Mark, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good evening. I'm calling in from the United Kingdom. So my name's Mark Campbell. I'm an independent consultant. A couple of my passions really are around helping pharma, CRO, and niche providers understand the full potential of decentralized trials and the untapped innovations there. And then secondly, how we make clinical research as a healthcare option for patients, and that on a global scale. And obviously, it's a rich tapestry worldwide around healthcare systems and access to both healthcare and research. And I believe that there's a resolution there through DCTs, how we engage in the community. And no doubt, as we continue to grow DCT, we can also address some of the lack of diversity in research. But in the DCT space, in making research a healthcare option and tapping into this global community and being more diverse, it's kind of underpinned by trust. And that varies based on patient population, the disease, where they are in their lives, where they sit in their world, and the beliefs that they hold. So I'm really looking forward to a broad conversation around the individual that chooses or chooses not to participate in research and the barriers that get them to the door. I think trust is a internally held matter. It's a belief system, and we have to understand that they exist in the world, so that when we design trials, when we look to deploy methods to engage with patients, to invite them in and engage in research, that we understand that we're dealing with an individual human being here, not a global strategy that you deploy to build trust. And it really boils down to how individuals interact and the experience they get throughout the trial, not just prior to or in the early stages of hitting the drug randomization or placebo. So I'm really interested to hear mostly everybody else's perspective. And so I'm Mark Campbell. I'm going to hand back over to you now, Talia. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Mark. We are too. So we'll introduce our topic here in just a minute. We've got one more panelist to introduce. Tara, would you introduce yourself, please? Okay, not sure Tara is able to come off mute. That's okay. We'll go ahead and jump into our discussion right now. Really, thank you so much again to our panelists. Thanks everybody in the room for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started right now. I'd like to introduce our one burning question for this month's discussion. So as some of the panelists have hinted to, this conversation is all about trust. And what does that mean? So it's often said that clinical trial participation is a relationship that's built on trust. And we want to discuss here, how important is trust? What can be done to increase trust in trial design and conduct, especially among patient cohorts who are underrepresented in clinical trials? Really want to get into this discussion. So we're going to start with our panelists first, and then we're going to open it up to folks in the room. Again, please raise your hand if you'd like to be called to the stage. And when we get to that part of this discussion, Julie will bring you up. So we're going to go ahead and start to kick things off here with our group. I think we'd like to go ahead and start first with, normally we have some different folks that want to jump in. I'm actually going to ask of our panelists, if you'd like to go ahead and start, will you come off mute and then we'll call on you here. And I see Edie has. Edie, please.
Yes, this is Edie. So I think what's really important, and a bit of this is growing up and still continuing to live in a healthcare family, but part of it is also the lawyer in me, that when we talk about a relationship, which is what we're getting at here, having the trust to have a meaningful relationship, right? We have to think about all the different variables. We have to define the relationship. Lawyers really love all our variables and definitions, right? And when I think of that, I think, okay, so we have to come at this from every angle. Some of the trust relationship will depend for the individual on what part of the system you're in. Are you the patient? Are you the provider? Are you in clinical trials? Are you only on the clinical side? Are you an RN? Are you someone like myself? Part of it's going to depend on generation of the patient, right? There's a notable generational difference in attitudes toward healthcare providers, from older generations at this point in time having a more, what I would call, almost blind faith trust of providers, whereas now we're seeing a younger generation be a bit more skeptical, right? And seeking care in different ways, not the most traditional routes always. And so you have some generational differences. You're also going to have to look at things like the socioeconomic status of a patient, right? The geography or demographics of a patient. And so you begin to realize how incredibly complex this relationship is, right? And I think you also have to look at the therapeutic area. I think it's really important. Having worked in oncology, I don't know if you agree, Talia, I know you've been there too. I see a very different relationship built between the provider and the patient than in almost any other therapeutic area. And that's not to knock on anything that's not oncology. Every provider is out there giving the best to their patients, I'm sure. But there is a different sense of the journey, the navigation, the complexity, the time, and the exploration of options. And so I see almost stronger relationships in that space because of it. So I would just be really interested, before we even begin to break down how important I think we all agree trust is, what are all the variables that we have to look at for our patients to even begin to explore how to get them to appropriately and authentically trust us? This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
I would love to piggyback off of what Edie has just said. I would tend to agree, Edie, having had a background in oncology clinical trials as well, that it is a bit more complex than other therapeutic areas, and the patients who participate in clinical trials are participating because this is their last resort, right? They have tried the standard of care medication, surgery, and chemo, radiation, everything, and nothing is working, and they're not in remission. They've had a relapse, and now they're looking for another option. And this is fortunately another option that we can provide. So that changes the relationship between the patient and the provider. One thing. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is something I bring up, I'm aside from my main position at Boston Scientific, I'm also a clinical research instructor for new clinical research professionals. And one thing I always tell them is developing relationships not only with your patients, but also your immediate team, and then your stakeholders, like your sponsor, your CRO, your central labs, all of your partners, is super important, because each position has their own agenda and slightly different, and their own timelines. And if we don't consider their point of view or their timelines or their burdens or concerns, we won't reach them. We won't reach them in time and in order to attain the same goal at the end. So that is super important, and I'm really curious to hear how other people maintain those relationships and that trust. Super important. This is Sophie. I'm complete.
I would like to piggyback on that and say, even beyond relationships with the team and everybody involved in the study, I found that having a community advisory board that's on board from the very start, even before the research protocol is fully developed, because once you have the protocol developed and you start recruiting patients, you're going to find that some of the groups that you want to get into the trial that are underrepresented don't find the trial really addresses the most important issues or some of those important issues for them. And so I've always had a community advisory board from the beginning, but I've been lucky to have ongoing series of studies and trials, both observational and clinical. So we don't have to start over and develop a community advisory board every time. But I think patients are getting more and more sophisticated, and we have to recognize that they have a lot to contribute to what are the questions being asked, and how to best recruit members of the target audience.
Yeah, and I'd like to echo again what all the other speakers have said, including David, what you recently, what you mentioned. I think, trust is key. I think, what we're seeing today is, what happens when there's mistrust, right, with COVID vaccination approvals. I wonder if patients were out there sharing their experiences, if they included them in protocol design, which I don't think they did, but can you imagine if they were part of the protocol design and their experiences of being a patient on the trials? Maybe would that have helped with dismantling some of these unknown fears about trials? Because I've not seen the public be so interested in trial development and approval, yet they don't understand that our goal has always been to decrease the time that drugs are approved, right, while still maintaining safety and efficacy. We've been trying to get rid of the white space and in drug approvals, because if you have cancer, you can't wait 4 years to get treatment, right? So if we can cut that white space down to 6 months, then that would be amazing. Again, we still need to ensure that there's safety and efficacy, but I think if you look back even a couple of years ago and now with these right to try laws, people aren't quite understanding how this development process works, and that it's not, we don't just give our drugs out to individuals just to test them, but they're looking for for these opportunities. So I think this is an opportune time for our industry, and I cannot stress that enough, to encourage patient participation in trial development. So, typically sponsors will look to key opinion leaders, and those are physicians, for advice on trial design. But I think it would behoove us not to include patient advocate groups and patients, because they bring a nuance to our trial design that we typically will not see because we're thinking so clinically, right? So what happens clinically may not necessarily translate well for patients in the real world. So do we need such a number of visits to the site within the first week of getting a treatment? Like, could that be cut down to 2 visits, or perhaps having a home visit in between? Are all of these assessments necessary if they've already been done previously? So looking at those things and getting the patient's perspective on that, because what happens later is we end up with multiple protocol amendments, and that just delays us even further in getting our drugs approved, right? So I think it's just really important to have that patient voice and to understand what they may be dealing with, and how we can better implement a trial that works for them as well as for us. In regards to targeting underrepresented populations, I can't stress bringing trials to the patient. So if there's, I hope to see this in the future, more mobile clinics, more decentralized trials, finding physicians who work with underrepresented patients, even though they may not have clinical trial experience, giving them the opportunity to be PIs, because they typically are in rural and urban areas. So we're opening up the doors for patients to have access to clinical trials where we haven't in the past. I'm hoping that we start to see that. So I think one good thing that came out of COVID was that it really pushed us and propelled us to think differently. And now is the time to think outside the box. So I'm hoping that would include, the patient's voice. I think I just wanted to end on, I know someone mentioned the Tuskegee experiment, and there's a club that I'm a part of called All Things Science, and we'll actually be diving into that study, and from a perspective of Black Americans who are clinical research specialists. We'll be doing that in January, so if you want to join us for that, you can join the club All Things Science, and that we'll get that scheduled. I think it's supposed to be in a couple of weeks, so we're happy to have you guys there and hear your voices. But I think rooms like this, and reaching out and hearing patients, I know that Consuli does that really well, and hearing what patients have to say is really important. And I think that sponsors are listening. So that's what I wanted to leave you with some encouragement. So thank you, everyone. I'm complete.
Lisa, Jess, this is Michael, and super insightful commentary there. Really appreciate that. Would ask you to take just another minute and just help the group understand, are there specific trust components that you get concerned about with decentralized trials, and maybe a little more insight into the right to try?
Yeah, so with decentralized trials, I think that there's from my perspective, it would be difficult to do a decentralized trial for phase one, phase two, right? The safety profile for those drugs and making sure that those patients are safe require closer observation. But when you move into phase three trials that are larger and you've already got a good safety profile, you know what dose to give, then I think it's easier for us to kind of move into having those trials be decentralized, right? But then, you may, if you don't, unfortunately for phase one, phase two, you're looking at specific centers that you can send these patients to. So you may not have as much diversity in earlier development of trials. So we've really got to look at that and maybe look at, do we want to target, resources to capture patients from all over, including areas that may have patients who are underrepresented and fly them in, right? So maybe the center is in Cincinnati, but you've got a patient who's in the middle of rural Kentucky and, having, paying for that. And I think everyone's a little bit worried about, oh, are the cost of having someone come in over, is it an inducement? And I'm like, well, I don't think so. So I think people have been a little bit shy of that. And I think we need to kind of think outside the box in regards to that. I think the FDA, probably wouldn't look too hard on a sponsor for paying for patients to fly in for an unmet need, so that we could have diversity versus not having diversity, right? So that's one thing I think we can do, and when decentralized trials can come into play. And then in regards to right to try, so there are several states, and I can't recall the number, that have right to try laws. And I think this came about in 2012. I remember this because I was sitting at a lunch at Christmas time around my birthday, and there was a little boy, and I cannot recall his name, but he had cancer, and he had multiple cancers. Actually, he had beat cancer like 4 different times, but developed a rare infection. And his family was pushing to get a drug to treat that infection, and the sponsor had said no, right, because they wanted it for emergency use. And there was this big, I mean, they had tons of people on the news. They had 100,000 people in their Facebook group, and the sponsor actually acquiesced and gave him that drug. He actually did well, and he discharged. And I think later he did die. He did succumb to his cancer disease. But I think we'll often see, and I don't think we should wait for public outcry before we start making changes, in regulation or in the industry, right? We should be thinking about that ahead of time. And so the right to try came out because a lot of patients didn't have access to treatments, that were under experimentation, and they wanted the right to try that. Now, those laws, and I think, Edie, you could probably talk more to this, I don't think they can implement them because the FDA still regulates that the sponsor has the right to say that they will or will not allow their drug to be used. So whether you have a right to try law in your state, it does not mean that the sponsor has to give you that drug for that treatment. So that, I think, we did a disservice to patients, was giving them hope that they could go through this right to try process and the sponsor still telling them no, right? So I think that's where, we've missed the boat in some regard, and how we can be better going forward. I'm Lisa, and I'm complete.
Lisa, so many good points. I just want to make a quick comment about I think you were talking about coercion, when you brought up the topic of payment for flying patients in. I think it would really depend on how it's done, right? So if the sponsor is paying for a patient's plane ticket to be flown into a site, if the plane ticket is bought in a voucher or paid for ahead of time, and you know it's not cash going to the patient, I think that would be you know approvable, and most people would understand that that's what that's for, especially like you said, if it's a therapeutic area where we lack diversity and we're trying to fill that gap. And the second thing I wanted to say was, um, you know you were talking about bringing patients in and giving them a voice, and there are so many ways to do that. My company right now is developing patient focus groups at the protocol development level. So as we are writing the protocol, as we are especially developing that schedule of events, um, that page, we are enlisting patients in a focus group to review that. And I think that's such a valuable way to include them, to hear their voice. There are many other ways also, but I think this is the way forward. We have to be more inclusive. And thank you so much for bringing that up.
And this is Edie. I would add wonderful comments by Sophie and Lisa. Thank you as always. Eloquent. I just wanted to add in as you were discussing right to try. So my head almost exploded as an attorney in this space during all of the right to try because I was really frustrated actually at our own industry. I think this very much ties back to the trust component. We are so used to kind of working in the shadows, right? COVID has unearthed that for us. There is no more curtain, and it's a dangerous place for us. It's a new, adventurous, dangerous place for us because we are not historically really good at operating outside of our own vernacular, outside of our own community walls, right? We're really good at talking in our own special speak. And if you're in the club, you're in the club. And if you're not, don't worry about it, right? And so this is, in a way, I feel like made patients feel sidelined in their own care at times, even though that wasn't probably the true, authentic intention of the individuals involved. And when you talk about right to try, I think a lot of it was born out of the fact that we are not good at breaking down really complex processes like access to investigational therapies through the FDA. And yes, you're absolutely right, Lisa. FDA does still trump right to try. It's very frustrating in the states who do have right to try laws. A lot of their larger research institutions have had to set up like almost a concurrent process to their own IND or IDE process to satisfy the state right to try law, even though the mechanisms were already achievable. And it's caused a lot of actually backlog. Like it's almost one of those situations where it didn't meet its intended purpose, right? And that was because the folks involved were very frustrated, understandably. The story that
Okay,
Lisa
so
told. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone was coming in, and so I think we didn't do a good enough job of exposing and working together as an industry to seek a real resolution, and also, like you mentioned, to not giving patients a sense of false hope. The other piece I think that's really important to add as we bring that back to the idea of trust with the patient and the relationship is, you have to imagine from each individual's perspective. And there's a great research ethicist named Quincy Birdsong. He is at Lipscomb University, and I wish he was on this call because he has the most incredibly eloquent way of sharing some of the hardest pieces of our research ethics history. But one of the things he's really particular about, and I challenge each of you to do because I think it's a good reminder of the trust component from the patient's perspective, is instead of saying Tuskegee, say the actual title of the study. Most folks don't understand that per federal government funding, the actual title of the study was The Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. And I think that right there begins that conversation of where and how deeply rooted we have trust issues in our research institutions and processes, even though I firmly believe everyone on this call wants change, right? And is as very, compliant and wants to work toward a better future. So I want to understand in all these different scenarios and with all these different variables on the table, how do we actually access the patients to build the trust? Like Sophie gave a great example of what her company is doing. Are other people seeing that actually play out? I'd love to hear examples. This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
Go
I'm sorry.
ahead, Almenia. I actually we have several new folks to the panel. I wanted to take a minute and make sure that we're hearing from our new folks, including an introduction from them, as well as people who are interested. So I think first, maybe let's start with Tara. If you could introduce yourself, and if you have something to weigh in on the topic, please go for it.
Hi, this is Tara Goodman, and thank you. Obviously, I was mute challenged, so I'm glad I was able to figure it out. But I'm excited to be on this panel, listen to all of your thought-provoking insights, and be a part of such a really amazing team who really does want to see change. So I actually know Michael. We worked together a couple of years ago in the CRO space, and I've been in the clinical space probably almost 20 years now, actually. And I think it's such an interesting topic in trust because if you don't have patients on a trial, you don't have a trial. And I sometimes think I work in a service industry, so I work with industry and manufacturers, and I think sometimes we're so focused on some of the details and operations of a trial, but we forget, yes, we need data. Yes, we need efficacy, safety. We need to show our drug or device works. But yet we're talking about site selection, feasibility, recruitment, getting patients on time, first patient in, all these metrics that are super important KPIs. But at the end of the day, without patients, you have nothing. And so just how you build that trust is also, it's both sides. It's reciprocity. It's not just focusing on the patient. Yes, you have to build trust and rapport. And how do you do that? Through KOLs, through outreach, through education. I mean, the one thing COVID has done is people actually understand what clinical trials are now. I mean, most people in my industry have never known what I do for a living. Like they don't understand. And now it's like I work in drug development. They're like, oh, so it may not all be good press, but at least there's awareness. So that's a step. It's helping people understand what we do, why we do. And then it's also working on the manufacturer industry sponsor side as well. And that just because you think you have a great trial, it's really looking at design, and it's looking at, of course, I'm going to give a plug for data though. It's using data to drive insights and analytics. We have a lot of technology out there. I just think we have a lot, like, overabundance of technology. It's honing in and using the tools to really access the data that's at our fingertips, real world data that we can model and use some of our technology to help drive solutions, because we as humans may not always know the answer right away either. So it's a combination of us coming together, being innovative, trying to do things differently, but also really tapping into all these amazing, progressive, innovative tools at our fingertips. And I'm Tara Goodman, and I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. Almenia, would you like to introduce yourself? If you have anything to add, we'd love to hear it here.
Yes, hi, my name is Almenia Garvey. I am a senior director, and I've been working in diversity in clinical trials for, I know, 20 years, and trust has always been an issue. And I would say if anybody really, really wants to understand the lack of trust, please read Medical Apartheid. I say this as a person who has read a couple of chapters, but just find it so difficult. You just have to be in the right mindset to read it. But if you really want to understand the trust issues that exist, Tuskegee only scratches the surface. And the other point I want to make is we talked about Tuskegee. I think one really important thing is this was a U.S. Public health study, so that's the other thing to that lack of trust. The other thing I think is really important for us to understand about trust is it's not a one size fits all, right? When you look at some of the atrocities that have happened, there's different ones from Hispanic groups that may be Puerto Rican or Cuban versus some of the African Americans. There's a lack of trust of being deported, being sterilized, being just abused. So there's so much out there that it's not no easy answer to fix this problem. And the way that I think we start with fixing this problem is acknowledging that we have a problem, acknowledging that these abuses have happened, and then trying to figure out from our patients, what would make them feel most comfortable in understanding it may be something we haven't even discussed yet. So I'll stop there, but I just think that we often talk about trust, but there's so many layers. If it were easy, we would have figured it out already, but it's down some of those barriers. Thank you. My name is Almenia, and I'm done speaking.
Almedia, it's Michael, and I really am glad you came today because you bring a particular perspective that I think needs to be talked about. And I honestly can share with the panel at this point that it's very clear that we need to continue this conversation into next month, because we are only scratching the top of what we are defining as the problem. And we're going to need to give this more time to get to some solutions. I would love to throw to Mark now, because I know that he's got to jet in about 10 minutes here, and I want to make sure that he has the opportunity to contribute. And then after Mark, you're done speaking, Clearly, we need some more patient view in here, and I'll ask Christine to weigh in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate you squeezing me in, and thank you everybody else for sharing your thoughts. It's fantastic. I'd just like to build on some of the things that Arminia and Tara was saying around the trust elements of patient access, of trial access. So when you take a global view, I led the global delivery of one of the world's largest dedicated research centres, which we sold to PPD Synexus. And as you go around, we were always conscious of what's the best way to attract patients and which method created the greatest patient retention, right? And I agree about these false milestones about first patient in, not best patient in, not most suitable patient in, just any patient in so we can tick the box. And in terms of trial access, my general view has been that if any of us got sick today with a general illness, say a cardiovascular diabetes, is research our first point of call? Or is diabetes, we go to the doctors and we're straight on metformin and we're talking about our dose? If we have cardiovascular issues, is our general conversation with the doctor about getting to maximum tolerated statin? And that's the end of the conversation. I'm very simplifying the matter. But what if I wanted access to a research study? And I ask this question all the time is, has anybody in our industry spent much time trying to find a clinical research study for a disease that they're interested in a location that's suitable, in a format that suits them? And invariably the answer is no. And then they go away and they attempt to do it, and they come back, and the starting point is, do you know what? It's impossible. It's so difficult to get access to research. And if you take that and aggregate it on the global scale, but the question is, where do you go for help? You go to your GP, your primary physician. And I worked obviously around the world talking to doctors, asking the question of like, why do you not refer patients into clinical research? And they relay the usual standards, which is, haven't thought about it, don't know how to do it. How do I get access to, quote, the trials? And how easy is it for me to get a patient through? These are really important matters, because the work and research that we did was the best patients you can recruit into trials that stay the longest are those that have been referred by their primary physician or are with their primary physician. That was our conclusion. And there's elements there because you have a relationship with your doctor. You trust your doctor. If your doctor's suggesting that you might want to consider a trial versus responding to an ad from an agency or a leaflet that you've seen where you don't have that relationship. So I think we should focus on where's the first point of where we need to build trust. I think for me, it's, how do we create the Google of clinical trials, where you put in a clinical trial and you put in the zip code, you make it easy and you can find where you need to go to. We haven't got there yet. Trial access is so complicated. And when you bring it to an international stage, it's so fragmented. And this race to get patients into a trial, it's more about speed than it is about quality. And quality is one word, suitability. So I think really we should be focused on how do we put research into the hands of treating physicians? How do we give treating physicians access to research? And how can we get that? And by doing that, we then start taking research into the community. And that's where mobile sites can come into effect, where we get patients who are actually not having to travel, who can actually participate within their community with the people that they and the healthcare community that they're aware of and they know and trust. So I very much think that we should, where the industry has become very innovative, there's a lot of technology platforms out there. No one's really solved the conundrum of an easy search to find a study. And in reverse, we're not spending enough time working with healthcare professionals to educate them on access to trials. Maybe COVID will change that. I do believe comments that have been made, that COVID has educated a huge population. But let's bear in mind, COVID has also thwarted and reduced and stopped and halted a huge number of trials during that period. So we do have a grace period now where there's a heightened awareness of research. So people are going to be going to look to find out how they may participate in new studies. And I do hope they go to their primary physicians and have those conversations. But I know as they get there, they're going to have a great conversation, but probably not the time or access to research that they need. So I've covered quite a bit there because I know I need to drop, but I truly believe that we should put research into the hands of people that the patients trust, and that's in the communities and it's in the treating physicians' hands. And we need to be able to give that to more people rather than what's been mentioned, focus on site selection, feasibility, and first patient in. I think we need to rethink this model, which becomes truly patient-centered and healthcare professional-centered. I'm Mark, and I've spoken far too much, but thank you, and I really appreciate the time.
Mark, that was really great. Thank you so much for sharing that. That super important information and sort of perspective on that. I myself actually, I'm working at a health tech startup, technology and services platform that looks to partner with community physicians that want to do clinical research and don't have that sort of infrastructure. And I would completely agree with you, having spent, I don't know, 15 years of my career working at very successful and sort of professional research sites that did very, very important work. And on the sponsor side, to now be working in community practices and community clinics, it's such a different, just the work is the same, it's the same trial, but everything else is quite different. How it runs, how it recruits, how the patient interaction, where the patients come from, the trust with the physician who's been seeing that patient for 10 or 15 years. And it's just a very, very different way to do things. So I really appreciated hearing your perspective on that. Really resonated with me. We want to ask, let's see, Christine, welcome to the panel, longtime participant here. Glad you're here. Would you introduce yourself, and would love to see if you have anything to weigh in on here?
Sure. So first, my apologies for being a little bit late. I'm dealing with my own trust issues with my healthcare system right now. But I'm a patient advocate. I run a nonprofit, People with Empathy. We're geared towards breaking down silos in healthcare. But one of the things that, as I've been listening in, and I didn't catch the entire conversation, is we do have this issue of trust in patient communities, but I think we're overstepping a lot here. I mean, we're talking about trust, and we're talking about clinical trials to people who, a lot of them don't even trust their own physicians, and again, I think what we are missing is that connection between the patient groups and the physicians. We have patient groups that are out there that are supposed to be helping these people, that are supposed to be getting them involved in clinical trials, and everybody has a group, and yet we still struggle to find people to participate in trials. So I think that we need to first build trust between the physician groups and the patients. I mean, and the physician groups and the actual the patient groups and the physicians. Sorry, I'm a little out of it today. And then work on that first, because I think, it is that initial relationship, and we're moving more towards decentralized trials, and that data is coming in to play. And these communities, especially in rare disease, are starting to organize themselves together. They're finding their own researchers. They're doing these things on their own. And we need to consider that. So I don't know. The trust thing is a huge issue for all of us. And I think replaying what has happened in the past is something that we can't do, but we do need to start educating people around the value of that collective data and how it can actually help them before we can do that. But again, we don't even have transparent conversations around data. And so those are all things that are contributing to that mistrust. So I don't know. I kind of covered a million different things and threw them all in there, but that's kind of my perspective here, is I think really working with patient groups and working with physicians themselves, because I don't think it's possible to empower individual patients if they don't have it in them. And so how do we work with these groups that are guiding them to actually lead them to the right conclusions. So
Christine,
that's it.
Christine, great point.
Yes.
Great. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Did I
go for
interrupt
it.
some?
I'm done.
I couldn't agree with you more. And yeah, you brought up a lot of good points. I just wanted to give you maybe a suggestion or food for thought, just something we could throw around. Your patients' trust in physicians, that's been a long time issue. One of the many facets of that is the relationship, the cultural relationship between the patient and the physician, as well as the cultural relationship between the patient and the clinical trial professionals and partners that work on the trials. So, how does a patient trust a physician or a care provider or a clinical trial professional, somebody from industry or from the hospital, um, is if it's somebody that they can relate to, somebody whose language they can understand, somebody who they think is working in their best interest. And one small part of that is cultural background. And we all know that we need more diversity, ethnic diversity in medicine, in providers, but also in clinical trial professionals. This is essential in addition to the diversity in patient populations in terms of gender, ethnicity, and whatnot, and also location, geography, with somebody, I think it was Lisa who brought up before, rural areas. On top of that, we also need diversity in providers across multiple professions. I feel like that's one thing we could work on to close the gap in that patient provider relationship that you were talking about. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I agree with you completely on that. I think there's a huge gap in treatment and care, and especially in different populations. You know, my mom is Filipino and from the Philippines. My dad is American. And, you know, we did a lot of prayer in the beginning on my mom's side and different options. And that my mom did not relate to the physicians here in the United States. And when I talk to her now about my care, she still doesn't know what was happening. And so I think there is that big cultural difference and those differences that we have to consider. But again, that it is so important to have a physician you trust. And if you talk to most people today, especially during COVID and with long haul COVID going on, people don't trust their physicians, but they do trust their own social networks, you know, which can be pretty harmful in some cases. So I'm not sure where to go, but it is incorporating all of that.
Could I just say that, and I know this is anathema to my own profession, but when people talk about trust with patient and physicians, we ought to broaden that to trust with the healthcare providers, because more and more I find that nurses and nurse practitioners are the ones that have the time to listen to the patient and understand why they're there in the office. And then the physician comes in and spends most of his time communicating with the computer to create the EMR and whether or not there's a trusting nurse or nurse practitioner that you can work with and is listening to you and understanding, I think sets the tone for the entire relationship with the healthcare provider.
I also think too is incorporating some of the patients who've been through some of these clinical trials to walk other patients through these. You know, I think Lupus has a program where they do that with minority communities and they pair them up with others to promote clinical trials. You know, and we're using people who have actually been through it, who know what to expect, and not just from observing, you know, but actually living in it.
This is Elle. Christine, that's a great point. There's another group I've worked with in the past called within the Black community, the Color of Crohn's and Chronic Illness. And it's doing some of the same things you're recognizing. It's working with people of color, indigenous background. And it's two things. One is a community for them to talk to each other. And then second is bringing in their fellow members or KOLs and PIs that they can relate to, and having them come to the group and be And while they're speaking, they're doing a lot of listening and letting the members ask the questions and giving that 360 view. But it's really starting with these people who are already have built trust in the community and coming in with an attitude and culture of empathy that you mentioned, the compassion and care, and then not being afraid to talk about and recognize the biases and inequities that occur. And I think too many uh, sponsors really want to push that to the side or refer to it in the past, but really understanding it where we are today, and look to partner with local organizations that are really being actively engaging in the community. This is Elle.
Elle, this is Michael, and I just wanted to reinforce that you're absolutely right. We need to take a look at who are the proof sources, where are the trusts that are there, and then expand from that. Elle, I also before we jump over to Jaleesa, who I know just flashed there a little bit. Elle, maybe you want to just let everybody know where you're coming from on this, what your experience is.
Now, this is Elle, just looking at it from both from the CRO perspective as well as working with clients who have come to with specific setting goals for health equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, but being frustrated in finding real solutions. So I think there is a great shift in making this a priority among especially large pharma. There's a little bit of frustration at smaller pharma of how to best use their resources for it. So I do think they're looking for innovative ways to, quite frankly, leapfrog this and improve. What they're doing now is very small, not very measurable impact, and they're looking for innovative ways to improve, and recognizing finally about the biases and inequities.
Thank you, Elle. Jaleesa?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jaleesa. I have a few different points I wanted to weigh in on. I wanted to start first just piggybacking off of the the implicit bias within the healthcare system. There's a lot of times where I know for me, particularly as a black woman, if I have a doctor who looks like me, who understands, the different biases that I may experience in life, I'm more willing to put my trust into that person. So there's also that factor that Sophie mentioned earlier about making sure that there's representation of the PIs in these clinical sites. So we've worked at Greenfire, we focus on patient convenience. That's one of the few things that we focused on. But also in doing that, we've been reaching out to a lot of different groups. So Black women in clinical research, Latinos in clinical research, and other groups like that, they work specifically to help fill those gaps. And then there's also, we talk about the Tuskegee experiment. We talk Henrietta Lacks cells. They're still being used today in research, but she didn't give her permission. So just making sure that it's easily transferred to all types of community backgrounds, making sure that it's translated in their local language, having a PI who is able to understand the dialect and the cultures, able to empathize with those groups, and also just removing the financial and logistical burdens of being a part of a clinical trial. There's the socioeconomic factor that has to be considered. Sometimes people can't afford to miss work. They don't have the childcare. So with Greenfire, we have the ability to make payments to patients. So if that's something that you can budget for within your trial and eliminate that burden, we can start to build trust and build those relationships, reaching out to the communities that you want to reach for the population that you want to reach. That's like faith-based organizations. You can reach out to barber shops, any of those local groups because they already trust those people. So it's spreading the message, but also making yourself known ahead of time before. So like we had one of my colleagues, they talked about how they did blood pressure screenings. And, after that, they kind of had like a database pretty much of people and they reached out to them and asked them if they wanted to participate. And they were more likely to say yes. And there's just so many different points that I know it's been a long conversation. to touch on. But there's it's just about really building that relationship. And when you build that relationship, that will create trust. We understand that there's a hard pass and there's a lot of things that we have to rebuild and refocus on. But there's so many factors in this. You have to decide where are you going to start and then start attacking it from there. And also, there's the lack of education. A lot of people may not even know about the trials. I think Mark missed air. Mark mentioned earlier that you can't find them. So if the local physicians, if they don't have information on the trial, how are we going to reach these communities? And this is Jaleesa, and I'm complete.
Can I go next?
Jaleesa, yeah, Jaleesa, just awesome. Christine, quick comment from you, and then I'd like Taya to weigh in.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say, I think one of the things we also need to think about is reframing the idea of clinical trials. Again, we look at this as a last ditch option, and we should be making heroes out of these people. People should realize that you're only taking Tylenol because other people went through trials. I think there has to be something like that as well when we're talking about them, that it's not just a last ditch option. This is a chance, in some cases to do something to help normal people. So anyways, Taya, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agreed with a lot of what Jaleesa was talking about. And I would say, though, the problem is so huge. It's really a failure of the healthcare system. And what we're seeing right now is the fallout of that, right? Because people no longer can afford to go to the doctor. So it's eroded that relationship between the patient and the general practitioner. So now patients don't have a person that they can trust or go to with their healthcare questions. So where do they go? They go online. And then they are susceptible to predatory behaviors online, right? With like not all information is valid, not all information is factual. But the crisis is really going to explode. I mean, I hate to be like the Debbie Downer, but I am seeing like this as being a humongous problem. And COVID is going to, bankrupt the system right now. We have so many people that are in hospital. We have insurance that is refusing to pay for those hospitalizations if people are not vaccinated. These people don't have $150,000 to pay for their hospital visits. So what's going to happen? We have record numbers of people in the hospital. Doctors and nurses can't even take time off if they get COVID. They are expected to be working. So this entire system is going to explode, and everything is going to have to change. And until Americans are on board with change, it's just going to keep getting worse. And one more thing before I end is, what we say in this room. We're all very educated individuals. We all have worked in the system. We know what to expect, but it's not what people on the street are seeing, right? It's not what my uncle thinks about clinical research. So really, we need to understand that while we have amazing conversations about these things, the reality is it's just not happening. Like the healthcare system is a failure, and we need to somehow reset and get something in place that is going to function. But thank you, Michael, for the chance to speak.
Absolutely. Taya, you have a very broad view of this because of the work that you do in really human talent management. And I think that your points are very well taken. Christine Naro, it is beautiful to see you here today. Love to get your comments.
Thank you, Michael. This is Christine speaking. I'm going to go a little bit off topic, but I think it's really important. And actually, the military is also combating this. So, one quote that I wanted to share was lowering the barrier of entry to give people the opportunity to come in. And what that means is basically, in order to get more minority representation in the workforce, we need to figure out how to train employees of all backgrounds. And I think that one of the biggest challenges is the bachelor degree requirement because a lot of people with minority backgrounds don't have a degree. And I think that a lot of larger companies need to invest in a training program so that they can increase minority employment by training these individuals and offering them the opportunity of further education. What are your thoughts on that?
Can I weigh in on that? Because as a part minority,
Absolutely.
I have no. So for everyone in the room, I didn't graduate college. I got sick. It's life experience. It's my own journey that has taught me and educated me, and it's the mentors that I've chosen. And I think it is hugely important that we do look past some of those guidelines. You know, people out here, we have some of our government officials who are now doing blind hires. You know, they're not looking at your education, but they're actually looking at your experience. And I think that makes a huge difference. So I think it opens up the possibilities to people in different thinking and ways that we can do these things in not that structured school way of thinking. So that's my perspective. I'm done.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate that. Um, I see that Frank has joined the room here. Frank, you want to give us a little insight as to what you do, and please share your commentary.
Well, I'm Frank. I'm from Germany. I'm a social scientist, and I advise media and politicians about COVID. But I have a question here, as the title is "One Burning Question." I hope that you accept questions. And one question I ask myself is that why has the U.S. a vaccination rate of just 60% when all of the scientists, or most of the scientists, and most of the advancements in science come from the US. I kind of can't get my head around that.
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's emblematic of what we're talking about today with regard to overall trust. I think there's no simple answer to why the overall vaccination rate isn't, 95%. Grant that there's always going to be a percentage of individuals who cannot be vaccinated or would not be vaccinated for perhaps religious reasons, etc. But I'd love to throw this out, but keeping this in the context of is trust an issue here in achieving a higher vaccination rate nationally? And is that something that is of a particular, and this is a bit of a rhetorical question, is that more of an issue with underserved and underrepresented populations? Sophie, can I call on you to give your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The answer, yes. Part of the reason why we have such a lower vaccination rate compared to the number of scientists and the amount of work that's been done on these vaccines is because we are not disseminating the information in a way that can be understood and sort of digested by our general population. That's what's happening. And we have a lot of social media and, you know, um, just different ways to disseminate the wrong type of information. So there's not a lot of control, one thing, and then we don't have an effective way of disseminating information about the efficacy of these vaccines. How many people actually know that the efficacy of especially Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines is actually higher than almost any other vaccine we have ever had historically in the history of the world? I mean, I don't know that many people in the general public who have actually looked at that data and really digested it. And it's sad. How do we do this? How do we disseminate this information effectively? That would be my question. This is Sophia Complete.
I think we have to also acknowledge that the whole government response to coronavirus in the United States and the vaccine was highly politicized from the start. And it's not, in fact, in many communities, Black and brown and other disadvantaged groups have recognized that they are at greater risk of getting COVID and of severe consequences. So they've been lining up to get the vaccine. And it's white Republicans who are buying into the fact that uh, three-quarters of them think that Trump really won the election and it was stolen from him. And so it's not a big leap to them to believe that the vaccines are a government plot to infect them or put chips in their bodies and so forth. So we have that other layer that's been added on in the United States, and it's very unfortunate.
I was going to say the same thing, David. I said that we've made it political, and I think healthcare in general has become political, and politics should never be involved in that part. But I also, Sophie, agree with you. The social media and the misinformation and the disinformation, again, going back to people trust their communities. And so whatever information their trusted sources are putting out, they're going to believe. And if it's wrong on purpose or wrong just because it was misinterpreted, it still gets out there. But yeah, the politics played a huge part in the US.
I
Yeah,
think
this
if
is Michael.
anyone, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think if anyone has any interest in diving a bit further, in all my spare time, I also teach law students in the areas of research compliance. And so last spring, every spring, I teach with a co-faculty member who, frankly, should be in this room talking with all of us about life sciences compliance to the law students, right? Hoping that at least one of them will lock on and follow in my footsteps, right? That's the darn hope. And I happen to have gone to Indiana University, which has a phenomenal health law program, so it's really fun to work with these students. They're just cream of the crop. They're really hungry. They're really excited. And of course, the campus is right next to the major academic medical center and down the street from Eli Lilly, so it's very in their face that this is a big part of the industry that we live in Indianapolis, and the city that we live in. And so I say all that to say what we did last spring, we completely upended our curriculum, and we wanted to give students a real factual, as it was happening, as it was playing out with COVID in real time, comparison of what bringing a vaccine to bear and all the compliance issues that relate to that, right, look like with a vaccine that was brought to bear prior to a pandemic, and then, of course, explore COVID in real time as the vaccine was being developed and approved and brought off of EUA. And we used HPV, and we had several individuals who specialize in healthcare communications who survived and lived through the launching of the HPV vaccine and talked about several of these issues. And this was, even before we were talking about pandemic circumstances, obviously the politicization, which is very real for the United States, of the COVID response. And it just really shed a lot of light for me, even in the throes of COVID in 2021, that it explained some of the motivations and some of the frankly epic failures in communication, and how repeating really great ideas for how not to do so. So I'd be connect and share resources on that, because I know we're going to run out of time before we can solve that problem today, but I just couldn't not bring it up because it was so incredibly interesting and on point. That this communications issue is so prevalent in our industry. We have individuals who are literally getting their PhD in how to communicate properly in the healthcare sphere. And so I think that this is a very critical component to building, to bring it full circle, that trust with the patient, right? That we're all here to talk about today. Thank you so much. This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
Edie, I thought you weren't feeling well. That was dynamite. So appreciate the insights there, and you may create a whole nother conversation out from that. So I'd love to get a little more international perspective on this, and so I'm going to, Frank, I hope that helped answer some things for you, but I'd like to reach out to Sabine. Sabine, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hello everyone. Yeah, it's been really interesting. And I've had few thoughts and from my own experiences about these trust issues, and especially with clinical trials. And I think last year that was one of the rooms I participated in as well, and we talked about the fact that the education system would maybe have to change, because until I started my studies in medical stats, or before COVID came around, I really didn't know much about clinical trials. And then I started to learn more and understand. And another factor, as was mentioned here before, is media and social media. And what I've observed in UK and from my professors and lecturers is that we sometimes forget the general public that don't study or haven't studied these subjects. They might not understand the language we're using, and that should be scaled down, and things should be explained in more basic language, because I've actually managed to get a lot more people go and get their vaccines, because they had this idea, and which also created trust issues, that normally the development of medication or vaccines takes 10 or 20 years. So how did we get this vaccine developed so quickly? And after explaining to them why this happened and how the basic principles of clinical trial, they were like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Or for example, with the same topic of COVID, when at least in UK, when we have the daily briefings, or you read the news, you are presented with these models that have been created, and like the average person, but let's say with no maths background, they don't really understand that. And when I have explained them in a basic, really simple language to other people, they understand more. And another thing that I wanted to phrase is the issue with the relationship between GPs and patients. Like in UK, you only get 10 minutes with your GP per appointment, where, as someone mentioned before, the majority of the time the doctor spends on computer filling forms. And I think that all just needs to change. There needs to be more communication, and we need to speak with more people within and outside our communities, and maybe try and scale down our language and explain it like we would maybe explain it to a kid. Thank you. I'm Sabine and I'm done speaking.
Can I comment on that point really quick? This is
Please.
Christine, and I just wanted to say that we actually hold courses online teaching patients how to make the most of their 15 minutes with their physicians and how to build relationships with physicians. So there are so many people that need to know that information, and that is one huge part of the trust, is getting them to learn how to communicate. So I'm Christine, my perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think that what Sabine brought up is really one of the underlying foundational issues here, is just translating the technological information and the terminology. People become much more trusting if they have a common vocabulary. And I think that some of the things that Edie brought up from a legal perspective are very critical, foundational kinds of things. I think it's very clear that we're going to take, since we're going to run out of time here with this room in the next 5 minutes or so, that we're going to take forward from this an opportunity to discuss solutions the next clubhouse that we do, but we'll stay around this trust topic. I do want to make sure that Ben has a chance to weigh in here, because we have a compatriot legal perspective that he can bring. Ben, do you mind?
Sure. I thought Frank's question is very interesting because it brings a bit of a international perspective. Having worked in Germany and Asia myself, I'm in the US now. I want to offer my thoughts on why vaccination rate is so low in the US, even though a lot of the research work and really clinical trials were conducted, led by people from the US, scientists and physicians. I agree with a lot of things people have said regarding trust and politics. Another angle I would add is perhaps it has something to do with culture and basic education and logic. When I say culture, I really mean the word humility. It just seems to me there's a lesser sense of humbleness amongst the crowd, the population, if you will, in the U.S. versus population in Europe and slash Germany or Asia. Just in my anecdotal evidence, speaking with friends both in Europe and from Asia, there's a less of a challenge from those areas from people to challenge doctors, physicians, or authorities for that matter. Whereas in the US, I'm hearing more questions from people who, other than the politics and trust issues, they just thought that they could go to the University of Google or YouTube and pick on certain very obvious misinformation and challenging, the 90% of the physicians that are actually advocating vaccine actually does work. And I think that sense of self-assuredness and the sort of the overindulgence of his or her own beliefs that I have to be right. I can be right, more right than these other clinical trial data or physicians. That's a very strong sense of this sort of, I live in the greatest country in the world. I must be right. The fact that I think differently from the public authorities means that I'm right. The fact that I'm in the minority of thoughts of challenging the vaccination, of the medical procedures and public health processes regarding dealing with the pandemic, well, that means that because I'm different, I must be right. That sense I don't get from the European and Asian audience, but more so in America. And the other thing is, I think regarding communication from the public authorities, public medical authorities, I think honesty is something that I was missing. I see missing for the past couple of years. A couple of examples. One is that when the masking was an issue in discussion 2 years ago, there were at least communication from the authorities today. Oh, we don't think the public should wear masks. Where in fact, the motivation was there was not enough supply of masks to go around. Therefore, maybe it was better to give the medical frontline workers a chance to wear masks. But that should be made clear to the public. Not that the masking didn't work, but rather, it was a supply issue. I think that's important, the honesty. And I think the logic part is I'll land my plane by saying this. There are anti-vaxxers that are advocating, oh, there's all these ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, all these therapeutic drugs. They work very well. Why do we need to have vaccine? What what I fail to understand is that these are two completely different issues. If vaccination clinical trial data shows that vaccination works, well, it'll prevent you from getting sick in the first place. So after you've gotten sick, sure, let's look at let's explore therapeutics. But before you get the chance to use therapeutics, if you can avoid getting hospitalized or seriously ill, why not use the vaccination? So the query to me seems to be focusing on whether the trial data works or not with respect to vaccination. Not that there are potentially good therapeutics that could actually cure you after you've gotten COVID. So, in conclusion, I think it is very interesting phenomena that, in such a great developed economy, we have such distrust and refusal of utilizing the vaccination as a tool, and we're still struggling with it. And in fact, nowadays, it is a huge problem because Omicron, it's really driving huge amounts of infection in the population, and we're not even worrying about long-term COVID effects yet. And I'm doing my best in trying to spread information to let people go verify, but still, it's a long way ahead of all of us. Thank you.
Wow, Ben, I think you just dropped the mic, and you must come back next month, or whenever we continue this topic, because your perspective is so super valuable. And I must tell you, even as a born and raised American, I have to agree with you. We are very entitled as a group, and we question faster than we trust. We question faster than we accept. And yes, we think that we are, because we have these rights, sometimes we take advantage of them. How do we increase education and trust and reduce um, the false information dissemination? I think that's something we should tackle next time. But we are running over time, I think. So I would love to hear from Nodar, our last speaker on the stage here on the panel, before we have to go. Nodar, would you like to introduce yourself and let us know what you have to share?
Yeah, thank you for letting me give it. I know you all were trying to leave, so sorry for coming in at the last minute. But hi, everyone. I'm Nodar. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist in training. But for my day job, I'm the director of clinical affairs for a medical device startup focused in the heart failure space. Um, I do agree with Ben's point about yes, like in the US, there is more pushback whenever somebody is, communicating with, a clinician or a scientist or some professional. Though I feel part of it comes just from like the long history of like systemic racism in our country. And there's a big mistrust with, scientists or healthcare providers. And I think about that even like what are the more distal causes? Well, it's like issues of care access. Like in the US, you need insurance or healthcare is going to be really expensive. And so the way people primarily utilize healthcare in the US is usually through emergency situations. So there isn't this like long-standing trust that people can build with primary care physicians, and I think that's where you start to build a trust is, through clinicians, through somebody, a doctor that you see regularly. And we don't unfortunately have that in the US because of all these issues to access to care. And I think also just like issues of like biases that clinicians may have, or even scientists. Like we have to be honest, like everyone's going to have some kind of bias, and we have to think about like how that impacts just like clinical decision making. Now, of course, I'm not a clinician, so I can't speak to that. But there's a great example, very quickly, just 10 seconds. There was a study done in Northern Europe, and they're looking at alcohol use disorder among women, and they're trying to understand like why was it so underreported. And when they did more digging, they realized, well, the male physicians actually had a bias that, oh, women don't usually drink as much, so they don't have alcohol use disorder. And so they weren't even asking the probing questions to, actually diagnose their patients to have alcohol use disorder. And so I think like these little things like biases, access to care, all kind of slowly trickle up to the issues of like, well, I just don't trust what you're saying as a scientist or as a clinician because I don't, yeah, just given all these experiences. So I'll land my plane there.
This is Michael, and I couldn't agree with you more. And thank you. I'm glad you were patient and waited to the end here. There was an interesting study that was done trying to understand why public transportation, in particular train systems, work so well in Europe. Despite the fact that they're, versus the U.S., they're pretty typically consistently on time, and the quality control is very good. But one of the things that came out of that were clearly the cultural norms. In the United States, most quote unquote Native Americans, and I happen to be a first generation American, have been born and raised to say that, we need cars because we want to go when we want to go, we want to stop where we want to stop, and we don't want anybody telling us that there's a schedule for any of this. So there's a cultural piece of this that when it comes to clinical trials, the desire and now the ability with the internet to question everything becomes something that caregivers have to deal with. Those who are conducting trials have to deal with. And I have to say that today's discussion has just been an amazing amalgamation of that kind of thinking. I really hope that we can continue in a similar vein, but be more focused on possible solutions for our next Clinical Trials Clubhouse. And to that end, I'm going to throw to Julie now, who will take us out on this particular room. Thanks, Julie.
Hi, everyone. Julie here. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. This room has really been great. Looking forward to the next one, as always. In closing, I'm Julie, Project Manager at Consuli, host for Consuli Conversations. As we wrap, just a few announcements. Be sure to follow me and all our moderators and panelists here today, and anyone else that has joined us from the audience that you found interesting. You can find us on social media, and you can find my direct contact, my email in my bio. Love when you guys reach out, so feel free to message for any reason, for any direct questions, comments, feedback. If you'd like to join our panel in the future, if you have someone to recommend, would love to hear from you. Again, for those that joined during our event or after the opening announcements and don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year. So we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent and assemble their health records, labs, prescriptions, wearables, quality of life surveys, things like that. Importantly, members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. If any audience members want to be a part of the data dignity movement and have us as your data agent or participate in any clinical trials, you can sign up to be matched to a study at consuli.net. That's consuli.net. There's no cost to join our movement. Learn more about us on our website or through messaging me or our social medias. Additionally, I've pinned the website to the top of the room. And with that, I very much look forward to the next room. Thanks so much for everybody who joined us here today. Can't wait till the next one, February 3rd. So mark it on the calendars. Thanks,
Yes,
sister.
that's not Groundhog Day. That's the day after Groundhog Day. So thank you, Julie. Just a parting comment here. I just want to make sure that all of you who are listening and have participated today, very, very grateful for all of that involvement. I truly hope that each of you and your family and friends can stay safe through this pandemic. We will get through this. We will look to the science, and we are part of the solution, all of us as a part of this. So in closing, gratitude to my co-hosts and all the panelists on here, and of course the audience for helping to make this a fabulous discussion. We will look forward to seeing you on February 3rd, and information about that will be coming out on your social channels. And very grateful to Talia and to Sophie, and obviously to Julie for your help today. Be well.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time, or hear you. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.